Okay, let's get started. Thank you everybody for joining today. Obviously, you can see you've joined the Toronto user group and we're super excited to have you. Today we have Lee, who's come to speak to us on data literacy and data storytelling, but he's got a really interesting topic, Persuade quietly, how to make our dashboards really be effective. Sorry, I can't remember the exact title of your dashboard. I should have written it down. Welcome to the user group. So just so you know, this is your Toronto TUG team. So if you have any questions or concerns or suggestions, you can reach out to one of us, and we'd love to hear from you. And just if you want to, we're also on Twitter, of course, so you can tag us with hashtag Toronto TUG. So we'd love to hear from you. So before we get going with Lee's presentation, Roland has a Kahoot for us. So we're going to have a little bit of trivia fun just quickly. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Roland, and pass it over to you.
Okay, 1 second. And let me just pull it up. All right, so you're going to need to go into Kahoot, and I guess it's going to be just just making sure I got this right. So I'm just loading the game, and then I'll share the screen. Okay, we got the music. All right, can everyone see the screen? The Kahoot
Yes, we can.
All right, so go into kahoot.it, and the pin is 220-8185. So I'm waiting for players to join. I see one, I see two. Okay, I see a couple more coming in. Like to see more. All right, good. Lee is in. And Candace is not allowed to join. All right, starting to see more join. That's wonderful. Here we go. So we'll give you a couple more seconds. There is a prize on the line. It's a new car, so I really suggest that you join. Worth thousands of dollars. All right, so I think we're going to start, if that's okay. So 220-815, here we go. Okay, and here comes the quiz. What are the chances you will attend Tableau virtual conference? The quicker you pick your answer, the more points you get. You got 10 more seconds. Hopefully everyone answers in the next 5 seconds. 3, 2. And actually, all answers were correct.
Wow, 5 people are going to more than 10 sessions. That's awesome.
That's amazing. Somebody's busy, but there we are. So everyone actually got a point. Any answer was a correct answer in this case. And we'll just go to the next one. And we'll see who's in the lead. So far we have Alex, DK, Sam, Michelle. And now we're going to go to the next one. So get your answers in quick. Here we go. True or false? Are you excited for the giveaway today?
Oh, I don't see the question.
And I think we probably have everyone. 13 answers. I think there's 13 in the game. I'm not sure.
I think so, yep.
14. There's 14 in the game.
Oh, it's 14. Ooh.
So that one we said you had to be true. So the right answer was true. If you're not excited, you probably don't want the giveaway. So now who's in the lead?
Still Alex.
The same. It's a close battle though, and then we'll go on. The quiz question: who was a Zen master who presented Tableau tipping and tips you never saw coming? This was at our previous Tableau
This was
webinar.
in May. Yep.
Two more. People are searching the web, seeing what it was. You got 2 seconds. 1 second. Kevin was it. Kevin Farage. And that was actually a really good session. And we have a new leader. And Michelle has moved up. Very nice. Sam is down. And we have YY and MT. Very good. And now we'll go to the next question. What new feature was added to Tableau Prep?
So that's
Yeah,
a very
I
most
did prep.
recent version. Hot off
I
the
did
presses.
Prep. There is a right answer here. 12, 13, 14. Everyone's done it, and is add missing rows in this series. I'm just excited to see who's leading the charts now.
Ooh, Sam.
Ojo.
Well done.
Ojo's in there. But I can't give him a prize. If you win, Ojo, I'm giving it to whoever's in second. Sorry.
It is rigged. Yes, it is rigged.
Win his Tableau conference. And then we have here, we are the champs parade. Who remembers that one? That was probably the last time we could actually get out as a group and celebrate something.
Yeah, no
Millions of
masks.
people, millions and millions of people in the streets of Toronto. World's longest.
Well done.
parade.
7 people got it right.
That's right.
So it's 9th to the 12th of November.
There we go. So we are going to have a session during that time with all Canada, all the Canada Tableau user groups, and we're looking forward to that. Second last question. What product did Tableau introduce with a native integration? With new. Which one is it? 10 seconds. Slack. 3 of you got it right. You would have seen Snowflake there before. And now we'll just go to next and see who's winning. Sam is in the lead. Yes, Sam.
Ooh,
By
neck
1.
and neck.
Well, the final question. And here we go. Answer it quick. Which of the following are Tableau community projects? Sports Biz Sunday, Iron Quest, Makeover Monday, all of the above. It's your last chance to win. And one more answer. All of the above. That's right.
Well done.
So here we are. Very good. So all of them are really a big fan of Makeover Monday and Sports Biz Sunday. And let's see who the winner is.
Oh, Ojo.
In third place, Sam. In second
Sam.
place, we have a new leader. Thinking it's going to be Lee.
Lee.
So we have Lee. And then we have Sam.
DK and Jessica.
All right. Very good. So we will reach out, Lee. 607 next. All right. We are done. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right,
Okay,
my work
so-
here is done.
Great work. I had as much fun playing it. Yay.
Okay, so back to our agenda. So obviously our star of today is Lee. He is an expert in building data literacy in organizations and data storytelling. So we're super excited there. I have the title of your presentation there. At least I wrote it down somewhere. Persuade quietly, dashboards, that motivate action without shouting. So super looking forward to the topic. Some of you may be familiar with Lee because he was the New York, New Jersey, New York. It was two different tugs, was it, Lee? New York and New Jersey?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. The tug leader in New York and New Jersey from 2010 to 2018 and a Tableau ambassador. And you've had your own company for quite some time, eh? 8 years?
Yeah, almost going on
yeah.
10 actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and you specialize in data literacy?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to it. So take it away, Lee.
Thank you. Well, so what
I
maybe
will stop sharing.
even more interesting to all of you is I'm a US citizen, but was almost a Canadian resident. I lived in Toronto for a couple of years back in the 90s.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Where did you live in Toronto?
I did. Young and Bloor was my
Wow, right downtown.
spot. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So was that the beginnings of your Tableau? Were you with Tableau doing Tableau dashboards then, or involved in data
No,
literacy? Or
no, Tableau didn't exist back then. It was
so
it was in the late 90s, the late 90s. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, I was before Tableau. Yeah, I was at CIBC. I was working in their internet group. So yeah, right across from Eaton Center. I don't think they're there, and I doubt they're there anymore, but yes.
Well, they have two brand new buildings that they're building. They're
Okay.
very shiny. Yeah. One I think is already up. I know there might be some CIBC people here today who probably know better than me. One is already up, and one's partly up, I think.
Oh, nice.
But I don't know if they're operational yet, but yeah.
Yeah, lots of great memories. My time there. So I figured I'd throw that in just so, but I don't have the Canadian accent or lingo, so I'll still be in my New Jersey, New York accent. Let me fire this up here and share my screen. Get Zoom to work. Here we go, share. Perfect. Excellent. So as I said, I'm down in Westfield, New Jersey, which is sort of central to the state, and we've got some nice weather here today, which is good. We're getting into fall. So thanks for having me. It's great to be able to stay connected into the community. As Candace said, I spent a lot of time in the Tableau community running user groups. I was an ambassador. I've been heavily involved with the Tableau Foundation for several years, where I was fortunate enough to literally travel to different parts of the world and work with different nonprofit organizations, taking them through parts of my data literacy program. So it was real exciting to do that, and a real honor to be able to do that as well, and kind of spread the knowledge into some areas where it could really make an impact. And so here I am over here, in case you didn't figure out that was me. And I'm proud to share this for a couple of reasons. One, my daughter goes to James Madison University down in Virginia, and last year I volunteered to help overhaul their COVID dashboard. And I'm bringing this up because it really ties into what I want to talk to you about today. When they started, they had a lot of data, and they just threw it up on a dashboard. But they didn't really think about what is it that they wanted to communicate, because they had a lot of different people that they had to share this information with. It was one dashboard, but it was for students, it was for parents, it was for faculty, it was for government, and so on. And that's really the theme, is how do you start to think about this as a communications vehicle to get a message across not just about a way to take the data that you have sitting, whether it's in Excel or some massive database, and just turn it into a visual of that data. It's much more than that. And I am running a company called Decision Viz, which is just me, which I love it that way. It's really a management consulting firm. And what we're doing is working with companies to help them what we call an army of trustworthy decision makers. And as you probably gathered, I really love Tableau. And I've been working with Tableau since 2009, not since, unfortunately, it wasn't around in the late 90s, but at the time I was running a project that was actually Tableau's largest worldwide customer. In today's standards, it's very small, but back then it was really huge for Tableau. So that really brought me into the Tableau universe in a lot of different ways. And outside of all the other ways I told you I've been working with Tableau, I actually teach a course at New York University called Visual Analytics with Tableau. So I'm still very much in touch with what's going on, not only at the company, but still finding ways to bring people into the Tableau family, as it were. And it's not just about being successful with Tableau that makes you good at data visualization. As Candace mentioned a couple of times, there's this term data literacy, and I'm not sure how many of you have heard it before. It means a lot of different things depending on who you're talking to. For me, data literacy is really just the idea of being able to read and write visually with data. A lot of times you'll hear people focusing more on the actual data side of it, but that's not really where I focus or what we're going to talk about today. What I am going to talk about is 3 ideas that really go beyond just the notion of building dashboards. And it doesn't really matter if you're consider yourself an advanced designer or if you're really just starting out. I'm sure some of you are maybe even just beginning your Tableau journey, but I think these things will save you a lot of time and, more importantly, help your work have more impact. And I'll be maybe even a little bit bold to say that I think this will really upend the way you think about data visualization. And it probably sounds a little bit dramatic, but I've really seen these things make an impact with my clients, not only in the work that they're doing, but actually even helping their careers, because it really makes them more effective at work. So the first one is that visualization is not just, it's not an activity of making charts. I really want you to start thinking about it as a language. And you probably have to learn that language. It takes a lot of time. It's not the kind of thing that you just learn in a couple of hours. And like other languages, there's rules, there's strategies, there's guidelines to it. And with practice, you can get good at it. The second thing we'll spend most of today talking about is how powerful color is. And it has the ability to clarify for you, but it also has the ability to confuse. I'm sure you've seen examples of both of those. So we'll take a look at a couple of case studies and some techniques for figuring out how do we use color the right way and how do we avoid using it in ways that can be confusing. And the last one is that really the goal of a dashboard is to help people do an analysis and to answer questions. And what I've seen is that most dashboards are actually put together in a way that goes against how your audience has maybe prepared themselves for what you can think of as consuming the information. And I'll explain what that means when we get to that part of the conversation. But so these 3 ideas is what we'll get into today. But first, I'd like to share an analogy about this idea that visualization is a language that you have to learn that goes beyond learning the features and functions of the software, whether it's Tableau. You've already, I'm sure, been doing things with Excel, maybe PowerPoint and other software out there. So imagine that your company wants you to be good at writing. And let's just say it's with English. So, and they train you on every feature and function of Microsoft Word, but they don't actually teach you anything about English. They don't teach you the language. They don't teach you how to construct a sentence, and they certainly don't teach you how to craft a story. So your screen is probably going to look like this. It's going to look blank, or what you write could be pretty confusing to whoever has to read it. And in many ways, that's what's happening to many of us today. You may have taken training on Tableau. You may have spent a lot of time on your own learning it. There's certainly many ways you can come up to speed, and you've gotten good at it potentially, but because you were never really trained on what we call the language of visualization or storytelling or data literacy, maybe it's not being as effective as you would hope. And because Tableau is so easy to use, it doesn't really take you long to get up to speed of making visualizations, and putting aside the fact whether they're good or not, but you can make stuff happen in Tableau. And while you might find that the software is easy to use, I'm going to say that that is not necessarily a good thing. So let me tell you what I mean by that, because, excuse me, I'm sure that sounds a little bit strange coming from someone who spends so much time in Tableau. The reason is that for some reason, once management decides to deploy Tableau, they have this assumption that the software is going to magically make you great at writing visual stories that are engaging, that are persuasive, that are easy to read. And probably many of you have seen that they're wrong in this assumption. And the result of that is that companies are missing really big opportunities to get the most out of their data and ultimately to make decisions and take action. So before we dive into a couple of those case studies, I want to give you a little bit of background into what's actually going on and what I mean around the idea of using a visual language. And it all starts with your brain. So many of you have probably seen points like this, that we have the ability to recognize incredibly complex patterns, and it happens literally in the blink of an eye, just in a few milliseconds. But I want you to think of a deeper idea that I think actually will blow your mind. Every time I think of it, still, it makes me really interested in the whole science of your brain. So your brain is working on an image as soon as it sees it. So think about this, that your brain is interpreting what that image means before we're actually using effort to think about it. I'll let that soak in for a second. The result of this is that when you don't show images in a way that communicates the message clearly, or it's just confusing, it slows us down from interpreting what's going on and understanding it. So the longer it takes you or your audience in particular to figure out what's going on, they're going to be more inclined to ignore it, or maybe just say, I'm going to move on to the next thing, or just go back to how they've done things. But if we can harness our brain's natural processing power, we can really help people go through large amounts of information quickly and get to, again, what really matters, which is helping them make decisions and take action based on this. So this language idea is when you understand how the brain is interpreting these patterns, you're not just going to be clicking around in the software to make your visualizations. You're going to have a better idea of what you're doing so that you're making specific choices about what's going to happen when your audience looks at the visual. So what are these patterns that I'm talking about? Well, two of the most common patterns in data visualization are gradients and color. Now, maybe you didn't think about them as patterns until I threw this idea out. Other things that are patterns are size or location or shapes, okay? In Tableau, of course, these are kind of widgets, on the marks card or functions of the software. But your brain thinks about them as patterns. Now, I want to also point out something that's very important about when I say the word color. It's actually two things, because color is a very generic term that we use. The first is gradients, and gradients are usually going to be measures in Tableau, and it's represented by different shades of a single color or multiple colors in some cases. The term color is actually thinking about unique single colors, and those are usually tied to the values of a dimension. So first point here is, when people say color, make sure they're distinguishing between gradients, or kind of this idea of color as a single entity. And the reason I want to focus on these today with you is because I would say they're the most commonly used patterns. And also, unfortunately, they're the most abused patterns. And we're going to see what that means. So there's three ways in particular that we're going to look at where I would say color is being abused. The first is where someone is using too many gradients or colors. And what happens there is nothing really stands out. It's hard to know what's important when there's so much color going on. The second one is when someone uses the color or gradient to represent more than one thing. So your brain sees it and it's automatically trying to make connections when it sees the same color or gradients. And now you're confusing it because it's trying to think that those are related when they're really not. And the third is using it when it's not needed. Because again, if your brain sees a color, it's assuming that there's some meaning to it and trying to figure out what that is. Now, I'm sure there's other ones that you could think of. I know I could probably list out another dozen violations, but we just don't have time to go on to all of those. And I really want to be able to give you some practical ideas here. So let's just jump into the first case study. By the way, as you have questions, or throw those into the Q&A, and then we can start collecting them and sifting through them as we continue along here. And if there's something that's really burning that you want to ask me about as we're going through this, feel free to jump in and ask as well. I'm happy to do that. So here's one example I pulled off.
Actually, sorry to interrupt you, Lee. Everybody else is actually muted because we're in a meeting, but for sure, just as a reminder to people, if you want to drop some question in the chat, like if it's pertinent to the slide he's on, I can convey that to him, or so. Super encourage people to interact with Lee, and we can translate your requests into questions for him.
Yeah, please do. You don't have to wait to the end to ask a question if it's something you want to get into. So this is an example I pulled out of off of I think maybe even Tableau's website in somewhere, and I saw this. I really caught my attention because whoever put this together really likes orange. But there's a problem here, is it didn't actually have any color legends. So the first thing was I really didn't even know what's going on. You've got these green headers, you've got a gray background, and then you've got a pie chart, which is using some of the similar colors that of the shades of the orange and of the greens. So there's quite a bit going on. And remember, the idea behind color is to help your message stand out, to point out something, to draw attention. So the more colors you use, it's going to be harder for your brain to parse all of this and figure out what that actual message is. One other thing I just want to highlight about color is I like to use a white background. This is my opinion. I think it looks cleaner. From a practical stance, in this example, the background was gray, and you're going to see where we actually use gray in the visuals as an important piece. So if you're using it in the background, you can't actually use it in the visuals. So my recommendation is, if you are using a colored background today in any of your visuals, I would say just check it out, see how it feels with a white background. And then also, if your background happens to be the same color as any of the visuals that are actually on that page, you have to change something, because you shouldn't be using the same color as the background and in your visuals, as we've already pointed out in some cases here. So I added the color legends, and right away, you're probably seeing some issues here because it's using the gradient for the same measure, which is amount expended, but it's on all 4 charts, but the range of those gradients is different on each one. So you can't really use this for starting to develop any kind of insights, certainly making any decisions, if there's no relationship between these colors. And then again, we've got some of these orange shades that are in the pie chart, so we don't know what that really means either. And the brain is trying to figure out what this all is, and it's kind of a mess. So the first thing I'd like to tackle is the pie chart and get rid of this conflicting oranges and greens. So you would think it's pretty simple, right? Well, if I just took the color out of the pie chart and just leave the pie, it doesn't help as much because now I've just got these slices. I can tell them apart, of course, because there's some borders, but it's really not as effective anymore. So one thing we could look at is, well, I've got the size of the slices, which should really help me. What if I could look at that in a different way? And one simple thing we can do is just turn that into a bar chart. So instead of using size for the slices, we just use those for the size of the bars. And this really becomes a big improvement because we can order the information the way we want. In this case, from high to low, it's very clear. Another thing I like is that we can control the amount of real estate that it physically takes up as well. Because a pie chart, if you've used them, it's a little bit tougher to control the spacing and so forth in Tableau, just because of the nature of it being circular. Another thing I want to bring out in the area of data literacy is that the same way you can have too much color be distracting, too much data can also be overwhelming for someone who's reading this. And in this case, you can see the author decided to have the values all the way out to single digits. But if you think about this from a practical stance, my assumption is that seeing these values all the way down to single digits probably isn't necessary. And if you just use it at a single digit, maybe not even a single digit, that it would be just as effective here. So keep that in mind, right? Because one of the things that happens is if you're using Tableau, a lot of times you're just going to get the default, which is going to be the entire number. And it really just takes a couple seconds to change the formatting of that. So think about it from a decision-making standpoint, how necessary it really is to show all that information. It might seem like a small detail, but when you have a page and it's got all these numbers on it, it really starts to have much more of an effect on your being able to soak all the information in quickly. Now, one of the things that I find where not much love happens on your dashboard is in the title. And the title is not just there to have some text. It really sets the reader's expectations. If when they look at that, you're really setting them up for what they should be thinking about. And that gets into this whole notion of literacy and storytelling, right? And we're not going to get too much into those topics because they're very deep. But just think about that when you're writing. You have a heading for a chapter in a story. It's that same idea that you want to tackle here. Now, unfortunately, what I see quite a bit when it comes to putting a dashboard together, you might see something like a logo and then a simple or vague description. In this case, city spending could mean a lot of different things depending on who the audience is. And so when they see that, they're getting into, again, a mindset of what their expectation is to see on the rest of the dashboard. So if you can be specific and detailed when you write that title, you're really going to help get the reader tuned in to that message that you're trying to communicate. And when I took a look at this dashboard from an overall perspective, I just said, well, it seems like the core here is that they also want to show spending for one particular year. So if I was to change the filter in the upper left corner, I change that year, it's going to show me from the data from a different year. So I said, wow, that should probably be part of the title. That would be good if we could do that. So let's take a look at what that could be. So here I've got a piece of information about total spending for the year. I've got the year, and I said, what about something like this? Okay, I can condense that all down into something that's very simple and clear. One of the nice things too is it gives me some more real estate to work with. And so that's a good start. Let's take a look at some of the other things that we are going to have to deal with here. So you may have heard when it comes to design of a dashboard that people will read either top to bottom or left to right. And this is also the same way that they will read a web page. So it's particularly important to stick with that idea because most of you are probably authoring work that will show up on the internet. And people don't distinguish that it's a dashboard. They're just thinking it's just something on my web browser, and they automatically go into thinking about consuming the information that way. So since this is the first chart that people are going to see on this dashboard, I thought it would be good to continue to use a gradient on here because that's really will help people draw them in and draw their attention to that rather than where else I might want it to use the color. Now, one of the things here is that you'll notice that the information is actually sorted alphabetically. And unless there's a particular reason to sort it alphabetically, which there could be here, you should really sort it high to low, especially when you're using gradients, because it'll make it very easy to see how things are spread out and where there might be groupings of gradients that are very similar. So if we do something like that, it could look like this. The other thing that was nice, because we condensed that other set of information into the title, it actually gave us more real estate. And instead of having a visual where we had to scroll, could actually put the whole visual in without any scrolling. So that's a bonus. We already took a look at this pie chart. And so we can just stick that in here. Again, one of the nice things that I mentioned is that we get more space when we look at something instead of a pie chart, we can convert it to this bar chart. This chart down here, to me, it seemed like they probably wanted to show a trend. So instead of using these gradients, I just turned it into a simple bar chart. And these last two, again, we've already using the gradient, so we shouldn't use it again. So instead, a good choice would be to use bars. And that simplifies it down. And again, we've got lots more real estate, so we can actually get more information on here, and it doesn't have to be super dense. One of them, the last one on the right, is just too long. We can't squeeze it all in and have something that's useful. Now, you may recall I said when we were talking about not having a gray background, you see how that comes in here because everything other than the gradient, I've used grays. I've used gray for the bars. I've used grays for the line because there wasn't anything in particular that we wanted to point out there. If there was something we wanted to highlight, say, for example, a few of the top values, we wouldn't want to use orange, we wouldn't want to use green, we'd want to pick, it could be black, it could be a dark gray, it could be a blue, but you don't want to use the same colors because again, you have to make sure that they're not conflicting. So overall, I think this view is much cleaner, and it does it in the same amount of space, which is also good. Now, there's one more step that I want to take you through that will really help you elevate the level of your dashboard. And I talked about this idea a little bit about how the title should be a single unifying idea that kind of engages the reader and brings them into what you want to talk about. And we can do that with the title, but and other elements of the dashboard. But I want to point out what I consider as a strange contradiction in the actual behavior of authors of dashboards. And it's not specific to Tableau. This is just something that's been happening over the last 30 years that people have been doing this kind of work. If the goal of a dashboard is to answer questions, why do we tend to present the information as a statement? So for example, let's start with the title of this dashboard. So I wrote this one before as a starting point, but what about something like this? It immediately gives you a very clear idea about what this is supposed to be. And the point about with questions is it draws you into thinking about this. It creates curiosity, and it kind of activates the mind and the brain and kind of that analytical component to help people start thinking about this rather than just reading it as a statement of, okay, yeah, that's just some data, but they're not really sure how they're supposed to be thinking about it. So you're kind of bringing them through that experience. Well, let's take another example here. So for this one on the left, instead of saying money spent by department, okay, how can we get their engagement into this a little bit more? Well, a simple question. How much did each department spend? Hey, I know it may seem like semantics. You're saying, well, it's the same thing, but it's really not. You're again activating somebody's thinking about this in a very different way. You're building their curiosity. You're wanting them to examine the data more than just stating this fact. Let's just take one more example. We're not going to go through all of them. So on the line chart, it says money spend by month, which is a little bit awkward anyway. So we could just say, what is the monthly spending trend? And now it really creates a very strong connection from that chart to what we want the reader to be thinking about. So I hope these ideas are starting to make some sense and maybe even give you some ideas about things that you're doing with some of your work. So let's take this other case study here, and then we'll finish up and have a few minutes for some questions. So here, it's interesting because they're using the same colors on 4 different completely sets of information. And again, your brain is going, oh, look, blues, purples, light blues, dark blues. They must all be the same thing, but they're not, okay? And that gets to be really confusing. So my sense here is that the author was probably trying to make this look cool. And the other reason I think that, not just because of the color, is they've got 4 different types of charts going on, especially some of the ones that are maybe a little bit more complex, like these bubble charts and the tree maps. Remember, the goal is not to look cool. The goal is to be effective at getting your message across. So let's see what some of the things are that we could do here to simplify this down. Well, we already know what to do with the bar chart. I mean, the pie chart. We can turn that into a bar chart. And on this bar chart, we've got a light blue and a dark blue, which kind of makes me feel it's like a gradient. It's 2 shades, but remember, gradients are only used for measures. And in this case, upstream and downstream are really dimensions. So it's better to think about those as unique colors and be a little bit more conducive to what your brain is trying to do. So I just chose a red and a blue. This bubble chart is really more like a pie chart again, except it's using size for the circles instead of the slices of a pie chart. So that's another candidate for a bar chart. And the thing that's most interesting on this page is that they chose to use a tree map, which has geographic information. So I said, probably let's just do that as a map, and came out with something like this. Dramatically different from the one that what we were just looking at. So when you start thinking about this idea of communications and a visual language, it starts becoming more obvious how you might create a chart like this versus the original one. And remember, again, this notion that color is really talking about two things. And here you can see how we're really using it to highlight data. One, again, is this idea of a gradient, which in this case, it's shades of a few colors. And then that colors is actually the idea of using unique individual colors to make things stand out. And in that first case, where they were really trying to use color to make things look pretty, that's where the trouble begins, right? They just start using colors all over the place, and it really gets confusing. And here you see that neutral gray come back in, right? And when you don't have to differentiate between any of the data, that's a good way to do it, is just to pick something simple like that. Again, let's talk about the titles here because that's super important. The original dashboard didn't even have a title, and it was about survey data. So now if they were showing it to people, maybe they knew that that's what it was about. But again, let's just say someone decided to send that chart around independently and there's no title, it would potentially create a lot of uncertainty or confusion. So just something like this would be a very straightforward title. Again, think about it as a question, not as a statement. And then we could take a couple of these examples here. Instead of respondents by revenue, maybe we could say, what is the revenue distribution? And on the map, respondents by regional cluster. I'm not in love with that. That's a little bit tough anyway. And what about where are executives located? I think that's pretty simple. So the idea here is also to get away from the complexity and really think about how to get your ideas across really simple. So let's just wrap up the three ideas that we talked about here today. I want you to think about what you could use from here and do something. And don't worry about getting it perfect, right? The thing about Tableau is it's easy to make improvements quickly, which is really helpful. So this idea that visualization is a language, and think about Tableau is a tool for writing visually. Take a look at what you're doing with color and think about how you can use it to focus attention rather than maybe make things colorful or just to make it, something jump out for the sake of that. And how can you use questions to create curiosity, create engagement with your readers? And I have a little ebook you could download. Actually, I'll just throw into the chat. I'll throw the link in there so you can go afterwards and download that. And it'll just give you some starter ideas for how you could take some common situations when you're some of the kinds of statements that you might have on your dashboards and turn those into questions. And just a few ways you can get in touch with me. I've got a YouTube channel where I interview folks from all over the industry, and you can get me on LinkedIn and Twitter and all the other good spots. So thanks so much for having me here, and hopefully we've got a few minutes to answer some questions. So fire away.
Thanks, Lee. That was super helpful. It's got a lot of those have got me thinking about how I can, modify some of how I'm doing things. But I have a couple of questions. So first, love the presentation, especially the questions as titles. On the map, why a diverging color palette versus converging, given there isn't a clear zero, good and bad?
Great. So let me go back to that just so we can all see what he's talking about. Yeah. So sometimes there's no, I would say, right or wrong. When I was working with this particular one, I felt that I saw that a lot were more in kind of that middle range. And so I wanted to make those stand out to see that those were highly related, and then have these kind of endpoints that were distinct, where we had some at the high end and then some at that low end. The green and the kind of orange was just something I felt worked really well. Also keeping in mind that I couldn't use red and blue because I had already chosen to use those for the bars.
Awesome. And also a comment that love the circles with the percentages on the map. So that's a good tip as well. On the department spend, on the first dashboard, thoughts on a tree map versus a bar chart, since we might want to know as a percentage where the dollars are being spent.
So a tree map on which one was it? Sorry.
Tree map versus on the departmental spend. So I guess the
Tree
first,
map.
sure.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts on that one. It's a good question. My first answer is I'm not a huge fan of tree maps for a couple of reasons. One is most people don't know what they are. If you are pretty sure that your readers are familiar with it, then it's something you could consider. So that's kind of part one, is to be careful and not over assume what your audience might be comfortable with. The second is that you have very little control visually of a tree map. What I mean is not only the space, but how information is shown, especially on the labels. You'll see a lot of times on tree maps, some labels won't fit in, especially just because the space isn't big enough. So you lose a lot of information. Now you might say, oh, but they could just put their mouse over it. True, but people don't want to work extra hard. And I don't want my audience to work extra hard to see the information. I want them to be able to soak everything in right away with doing the minimal amount of work to do that. So only in certain situations do I really like using a tree map. I hope that helps answer your question.
Awesome. That's great. Jeffrey also has a question. How much information should you be putting on one page? It seems to me that the Cincy Insights dashboard tries to communicate too much information.
Again, that's an excellent point, because that is a dangerous area that people stumble into quite a bit. The first part, the way I'd answer that, is the information that you show should always tie back to the title of that page. And that's another reason to have a very clear and specific title, because if you don't, you can tend to let things that aren't related seep into that page, right? Oh, I'll just stick one more thing on there, right? It's easy to do that in Tableau, and we've done that all with other applications as well. It's not just something with Tableau. That's kind of part one in terms of relevancy and this whole idea of storytelling, if you want to think about it that way. Outside of that, the general rule I follow, and I didn't do it here just because I was using some examples in terms of transforming the original, 3 or 4 charts to a page. If you've got to put more on there, if you think, wow, I need 5 or 6 charts, break it up. Try to figure out which ones really go together, and make another page, make another dashboard. In the old days, I would say, when people were trying to print things or maybe send files around, there was this desire to make more on a page for kind of efficiency or financial reasons. We don't really have that problem anymore when things are electronic. So split it up, put it on a page, make sure everything works together. And those 3 or 4 elements is probably about all someone can visually soak in, because you don't want to have too much on the page. So that's a rule of thumb. Again, it also depends, you could say 3 or 4, but it also depends how dense those are, right? It doesn't mean have 3 or 4 super dense charts on there either, because then you're running into the same problem of just trying to have too much going on, and it's going to be too difficult for people to really absorb what's going on.
Awesome. Thanks. That's super helpful. For sure. So I think that's all the questions we have. If anybody else has a question, I did, Lee, you put your Decision Viz Pro 21 Tug, they link to your book, it just to the hosted panelists. So I did copy it over for everybody else. So you can go there to see, and then of course, if you have any other questions that are maybe more involved, feel free to reach out to Lee in the areas that he's given you. So Ojo also says, have you come across a scenario where teams ask for a super dashboard landing page to guide users across a slew of dashboards grouped by lines of business? Your ideas on that?
Yeah, I kind of like that. I'm not super in love with that idea. I get it. It's kind of like a table of contents, and there's a pro and a con to this. I mentioned this idea of thinking about your dashboard online as a website, and very rarely do you see a page like that on a website. And so I would encourage people to think about how to incorporate that into the structure of the dashboard and the flow of the dashboards directly, as if it was a website. Now, I know that's not always possible. That's why I'm kind of caveating it to say that I think there are circumstances where you could do it. The other thing you can do, which I think rather than maybe having it as a separate maybe dashboard page, is having it controlled as a pop-up on maybe even each dashboard. So now that there's more advanced navigation controls in Tableau, you could have it hidden, and then people could just bring it up if they need to navigate in a different way, rather than having it as, say, kind of a landing page, as you described, which certainly we've all done in the past. I think that's kind of what you were getting at.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here today, Lee. I think that this has been super informative, and I hope everybody's been able to get something out of it. You've had lots of great ideas here for engaging our audience and our dashboard. So hopefully we'll all be better storytellers from here on out.
I hope these things will help. Thanks again for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks. And just quickly, for everybody that's still on the line, I just have a few things I was going to show you just on our way out. So I just have a few tidbits just to remind everybody to register for Tableau conference, which is the 9th to 11th, as we discovered in our trivia. We're during conference, Canada is going to use the hashtag CanadaTC. So be sure to look out for that on Twitter, because we're going to host a big, massive tug across Canada. It's just going to be a casual kind of meetup thing. So hopefully people can come and meet people from other parts of the country. I also, in the trivia, we tempted you with the new features of the Tableau Prep. If you want to try that out, there's a great community thing, that Prepping Data Challenge, that they release a new challenge in Tableau Prep every week. And you can find that at preppinddata.blogspot.com. And this week's challenge deals with the adding rows in. So it doesn't take that long. It's super quick. I think I did it in like half an hour. And there's also a video, if you don't have time to go through it yourself, there's also a video that walks you through it in the solution. So it's just a good thing to check out. And lastly, Tableau Public Gallery, just wanted to make sure everybody knew that they can subscribe to the Viz of the Day. I took a quick screenshot there so you all know how to find it. So thank you again, everybody, for coming. Be sure to tag us on Twitter, Toronto, hashtag Toronto Tug, and look out for the Canada TC hashtag. And hopefully we'll all see you at conference.